Hello, my name is Dr. Courtney Washington, and today I'm going to be talking about pediatrics. I'll also be sharing an experience that happened to one of my twins over the Christmas holiday. I have twin boys, and they are 2 years old. So kids are a little different. They're more composed of body water. So the fever for them, whenever they have a temperature of 100.4 or above, they lose water very, very easily, and they get dehydrated. So my babies were born at 32 weeks. I had preeclampsia. So they've been relatively healthy since they got let go from the NICU when they were about 1 month old. So my firstborn twin, he started to have a fever probably like a week before Christmas. So usually he'll get maybe a little fever. I treat him with Tylenol. He didn't have any thick runny nose or anything like that. I thought it was just allergies or a little virus. So as the days progressed, I started to get a little bit more concerned because he started being more tired, more sleepy, wasn't playing as much. So about day 6 of fever, I decided to bring him to children's emergency room. Of course, it's COVID. I don't like being in crowded places. I waited there, and as the waiting room started to fill up, and there was one baby that coughed, and we had to get out of there. So I took my baby home, and I said, you know what? I'm going to do a head-to-toe exam. So I went to go look in his ears, and it was a little red and bulging. So I was like, maybe it's an ear infection. I hadn't quite gotten a pediatrician for him yet. After I finished residency in September, I moved to New Orleans, bad doc. So I said, you know what? I'll treat him for the ear infection. Then I'll call his pediatrician that saw him initially when he was a newborn. So I treated him for the ear infection. He stopped kind of pulling at his ear, but he continued to have a fever. I mean, 102, 103 consistently. So I gave him some Pedialyte, treated his fever. Christmas Eve, my dad came over, so he played with his grandparents. Still wasn't himself, but I noticed that he was getting a little bit more hoarse, and I'm like, man, this fever. So I wrapped all his gifts. I said, you know, I'm just gonna wait it out, see how he does. So I wrapped all of his gifts. I said, you know what? He is just going to die when he sees these Christmas presents in the morning. He comes down in the morning, and his brother is going bananas. And he is like, oh my God, he's crazy about his gifts. And my baby just kind of sat on his Nana's lap and looked very lethargic. I took his temperature, and lo and behold, it's 104. I immediately got him dressed. I brought him to the ER. So in the ER, we talked, we discussed his symptoms, and really he wasn't having many symptoms. The fever, wasn't eating as much, wasn't drinking as much. So they got some urine, did all of the blood work, and everything came back negative with the exception of CRP. So CRP is an inflammatory marker. It's really non-specific. I treat pediatrics, but not as often as adults. So right before we left the ER, I discussed it with the doctor. She said, you know, if he doesn't get any better, bring him to his pediatrician. But the CRP, I wasn't really sure what it meant. But other than that, he didn't have a high white blood cell count that told me if he was having a bacterial infection or something. Didn't have a UTI, nothing. So she instructed me to continue the antibiotics, and I was concerned, but I said, okay. Later on that night, his fever now climbed to 105. I went to check on him because on his monitor, I heard him talking, but I knew that his brother was asleep. When I got up to his room, he was drenched in sweat, he was chattering his teeth, and he was basically talking to himself. So at this moment, I had the mommy meltdown. So I ended up calling a girlfriend who's internal medicine, and she called her friend who's a pediatrician. And she was kind enough to talk to me and kind of walk me through this at midnight. So we talked about everything. And then she asked me a peculiar question. She said, well, did they do an echo when you went to the ER? And I kind of said, you know, an echo. I don't know why they would do that. But an echo is an ultrasound of the heart. So all of my medical knowledge has left my body because when it's your kid, I mean, your medicine goes out the window. So she advised me to just treat his fever, that sometimes when kids have a fever, they will hallucinate, and to bring him to the ER in the morning because a lot of the times at night, ERs are super busy. So in the morning, before I could even wake up, my mom calls me because he spent the night in her room that night. And she says, he has these bumps on his legs and he's burning up. So I turn on the lights, I go look at him, and the first thing I notice is that his lips are so swollen, and the bumps on his legs, they're raised. They're not really itchy, but I am like, hope, stop the press. So get him dressed, get him back to the ER. And the ER physician, of course, she asked me the same thing they asked the first time. COVID, has he been around anyone with COVID? And I say again, I'm a doctor. I do treat COVID patients in the hospital, but I've had no symptoms. His brother has no symptoms. He's not coughing. So she looked at his legs. She looked at his gums, his mouth. His lips and gums were swollen. And then she said something peculiar. She said, I'm going to rescan him for COVID, but we're starting to see a Kawasaki's like illness in kids that have had COVID before. And I'm like, well, he's never had COVID. Then it dawned on me. I was like, Kawasaki's. Within 30 to 45 minutes, the cardiologist came in, the fellow, and she did an ultrasound of his heart at this point. So her main suspicion was Kawasaki's. His COVID-19 test from the day before was negative. So we discussed it. We did an ultrasound, and look it up. Ultrasound on a kid's heart, 2-year-old, he did not stay still for it. So they gave him Tylenol, and she said, I'm just going to start his IVIG, which is the treatment. It's donated antibodies that helps his body not attack his body. So it's a standard of treatment. So she ordered it, although he didn't have the fifth symptom, which was a rash or redness of his palms. So at this point, I am feeling like the dumbest doctor and the worst mom in the world, because I'm like, how did I miss that? Kawasaki's, usually the kids will have very, very red eyes. The white parts of their eyes will be red. Their tongue gets swollen. It's beefy red. And really the scary part about this phenomenon, and we really don't know what causes it, we think it's caused by some type of virus, is that if you don't give them the IVIG, which is the treatment, before 10 days, they can have long-term heart problems, which is scary to think of a 2-year-old having heart problems, right? And also with COVID, they're seeing a lot of patients that have had COVID that are kids. They end up having a Kawasaki's like reaction, which can lead to death if untreated. So they started the IVIG that evening, and it was like magic. His lips became less swollen, and his lips and gums were so swollen that he stopped eating and just would, say owie because it hurt. And he got dramatically better. Fever resolved, although while he was getting the infusion, his blood pressure did drop, which was, a little concerning. So I was excited. I went to work the next day. I said, my baby's getting better. And I came back that evening, and his fever started coming back again. So at this point, they'd given him Tylenol. He had finished the IVIG, and they were waiting on the cardiologist to come see him because there was nothing they can give him. Of course, I couldn't go to work. I tried to go, but I was just like a mess because it's my baby. I don't know what's happening. I ended up getting off work a little bit early. Someone came and covered my shift. I came back to the hospital, and I spoke with the cardiologist, and he said, we're going to try another dose of IVIG. If that doesn't work, then there are biologics. And my mind, I have a meltdown. Biologics, I don't know many biologics that are approved for peds, and I'm also not a pediatrician. I just usually see them for the common earache. So second round of IVIG goes in, and he's right back to feeling like himself. And he went without a fever the whole rest of the next day, and I was so relieved. So I feel like God allows you to go through things. It made me definitely a better doctor, and it also is an opportunity to give my testimony. As physicians, sometimes we don't know your child. I don't know if your child is shy or what they are at baseline. So you know them best. Doctors are human. We don't know everything. If your child does not get better and you take them to the ER or to the pediatrician, always bring them back. Also, if your child has a fever for over 5 days, please make an appointment with your pediatrician or go to the ER to evaluate. Another huge red flag is if your child is not eating and not drinking, and especially if they're not having any wet diapers for, I'd say, a 24-hour period. That is a sign that your child may be dehydrated and needs to go to the ER. Also, kids under 1, if they still have a little small spot on the top of their head, if that looks a little sunken and they're not drinking appropriately, always bring them in. So I just wanted to talk about pediatrics and talk about the incident with my baby. Even though I'm a doctor, I don't know everything. And also the doctor that saw him the previous day did call me, and she, was very concerned and apologized and said, he didn't have those rashes and his lips weren't swollen at the time. I said no. So, it was a very humbling experience. I'm glad my kid is happy and healthy. He has an appointment with his cardiologist in a couple of weeks, and I hope it goes as well as it did 4 weeks ago. Thank you guys for listening. Please comment below, ask any questions. I will also be sharing a link of the dose of Tylenol and ibuprofen that you should be giving your child based upon their weight. Medications are weight-based dosing for kids, especially under 12 years old. So definitely stay safe out there, and thanks for listening. Please like, subscribe, and share this video.